Someone You Should Know, a program about people you know and even more that you don't. Hosted by Stuart Sax, veteran, husband, father, and grandfather. Now, here's your host, Stuart Sax.
Well, it's Wednesday morning. It's 10 o'clock, and that means it's another episode of Someone You Should Know. Welcome. Glad to have you with us again. We're going to have some fun this morning. And we are brought to you today by our good friend Irving Chung, who is a franchise specialist. You've heard me say this before. Even if there is the slightest thought in your head about what is franchising all about, Irving is more than willing at any time just to discuss what franchising is all about and just to give you the facts and figures and let you know if there's ever an opportunity that you want to get involved, full-time, part-time, whatever, you want to partner with somebody. He's got all the answers. Reach out to Irving Chung. He is an expert at franchise information. Well, today is going to be kind of a throwback day because I went to a reunion a year ago, and just to set it up, it was called the Last Look Reunion. And I met up with this old guy who was my roommate in college. We were best buddies in high school, even in the same band together. And this was a photo we took from a year ago at what was called the Last Look Reunion. And it was called the Last Look because they were in the process of demolishing the high school that we attended back in Hammond, Indiana. And Mike and I have been best buddies ever since we were kids in the old days. And also fast forward a year, and live right here on Someone You Should Know is my good buddy, Mike Miller.
Thank you, Stuart. It's great to be here. I appreciate it very much. I really do.
There he is. And we're going to talk a little bit about the drum set that's sitting behind him too, because that's very much a part of our history. And also, welcome, Mike. Good to have you.
Good to be had. Thank you.
You know, when I was prepping for the show, and we decided that we would just have a show and kind of reflect on the past together, I realized it has been a lot of years ever since we were kids playing at each other's houses sometimes and doing sleepovers back in Northwest Indiana. And that was a long time ago.
Well, and not to divulge either of our ages, Stuart, but when you think about it, it has been more than 60 years since you and I picked up our instruments, our respective instruments, and started with that 8-piece group that we called the Kingsmen. That's 60 years ago. And I recall 10 years ago, I think calling you up, maybe, and even Jim Harris, and at the time, Huey and Bennett, who were two other guys in the band, and asking if we wanted to go out on our 50th anniversary tour, since we had just celebrated that milestone. And when everyone stopped laughing, I think the phones just hung up. But it's been a great run. It really has been. So a lot of fun. And people should know that our parents were very friendly with each other as well. So it's not just this generation. This goes back to our parents, who were very good friends while you and I were close to being in diapers.
Well, we grew up in a community.
Go back to diapers, but that's another.
Yeah, well, we grew up in a community that was really mama papa stores. All your dad was in business, my dad was in business, and just about everybody that we grew up with, we came from family owned and operated businesses, and all. So that's how we all kind of interacted and grew up. And you're right, we played around as kids at each other's houses. And then as we got into high school, I still have some of the greatest memories of the band. And folks, we should set this up that that's our record. And by the way, it is still available.
I saw it. I saw it online. Matter of fact, I did see it online. And the reason I'm showing side is because you were really the star of the B side of Goodnight Sweetheart. The A side was uh, Humpty Dumpty, which I didn't remember until I pulled out the record, that it's giving credit to Harris for writing this song.
Yes.
I didn't know. I didn't remember that.
Well, it wasn't that we gave credit to Harris. I think he took it.
Well, you know what it was. The producer of the record in Chicago apparently had done the discussions with Jimmy in
Right.
setting up the studio time and everything else. And I think he just said, "Well, heck, I'm just going to put Jim Harris's name underneath the title." And actually, after all these years, I'm kind of glad he did, because I've heard this song recently, and I'm glad he was the one taking the blame for it, not me or anybody else.
And the story, I'm not really sure I remember where the name for the band, the Kingsmen, came from.
It actually came from Humpty Dumpty, because it was
all the Kingsmen.
Right.
Okay. So we called ourselves the Kingsmen, and
before Louie Louie, a year before Louie Louie, by the way.
Right. And so, yeah, when Louie Louie came out, all of a sudden we started getting more popular, and we realized that the whole world thought that we were the group that did Louie Louie, and so we had to learn the song real quickly so that we could add it to our playlist. Until I think you or Jimmy or somebody might have gotten a cease and desist letter saying you're infringing on our on our credit. So
Yeah.
So at that point, that was about the time that well, there were three or four of us in the band were graduating and going on from high school to college. So you continued with the other members. You renamed and you became the Reflections, right?
We did, and then we had the same problem with Reflections as we did with the Kingsmen, because just like Romeo and Juliet came out by the Reflections, and so there we were again. So luckily, by the time that became popular, I think that was about the time that the last of us had graduated from high school, because Ted Abel was in my class, and Larry Allen was in my class. Kenny Baker, who is another guitar player, was behind us by a year, and not one person watching the show gives one hoot or a holler about what I'm talking about right now. But nevertheless, it was a great run. We had a great time.
Yeah, everybody says, "Oh yeah, I remember Louie Louie, and I also remember Romeo and Juliet by the Reflections."
And that's about the end of our company. That's about it.
But those were some good days, and then we connected down at Indiana University, spent a little time there, and then you left Indiana and you went to probably the premier broadcasting school in the country at that time was the Columbia. Was it called Columbia College at that time? Was it, or was it the Columbia School of Broadcasting?
No. That was a different company. Columbia School of Broadcasting was really just a private. If it would have been done today, it would have been online. Okay, but it was just basically a broadcast school. Columbia College was a liberal arts school, and for instance, Ronnie Rice of the New Colony Six went to Columbia College. Pat Sajak went to Columbia College. He was there when I was there, as a matter of fact. So it was broader than just broadcasting. It was really a liberal arts college. There were actors that were there, some of them going out to Second City and a couple of other great venues. But it had a great reputation, still does. I stay in touch with the college by getting their information newsletters and things like that. It's cool.
And then as they say, it just kind of launched the career. And both of us actually wanted to pursue broadcasting right out of college. Unfortunately, I went into the Army, and when I got out of the service and all, I wanted to go back into broadcasting, but I got sidelined in the family retail business and all. But your career was launched in broadcasting, and you spent almost your entire career in broadcasting.
Yeah, 32 years. 32 years. And to be honest with folks, and I'm not just stroking him here, but uh, I was very fortunate because I'd started in Gary, Indiana, as you remember. But then there was a job opening in Orlando, Florida, and you happened to already be in Orlando working at Disney World. So when I came down for the interview, they called me up and said, "Yeah, come on down. We want to talk to you." You and I stayed together while I was in town for the interview for that job. I didn't
Right.
get that job because the job at that point, and that was with WDBO, uh, the job was for a production director, and I just wanted to get my foot in somewhere besides Gary, Indiana. So that's why I applied for it. But when I didn't get that job, I remember it wasn't more than a week after I'd returned back to Munster. And I got a phone call from the general manager who said, "Listen, we have an opening for a talk show host at night. Do you know anybody who does talk?" And I said, "Yes, and I'll have them send you something." Exactly, right away. And of course, I took the best air check I could of my show in Gary and sent it to him. And he said, "Why didn't you tell us that you did talk radio?" I said, "Because nobody asked."
Yeah.
That was the job to produce commercials. That's what I went down there for. So anyhow, as they say, the rest was history. But I got that job, and you didn't stay at Disney in Orlando very long, though, did you?
I was there for 2.5 years.
Really?
Yeah. Actually, it was like a year or so when the park was under final construction before it
Okay.
ever opened. So that was in 1970, and then it
How'd you
opened in
get?
October.
How did you get?
I was
How did
I
you
was
get
with the
that?
entertain. I was in the entertainment division, and
Yeah.
at that time, that's when they were interviewing, auditioning the talent that was going to be entertaining throughout the entire Magic Kingdom.
Right.
From the
The
barbershop
barbershop
quartet.
quartet. Right.
The what?
I was just repeating what you just said. The barbershop quartet, which was very
Yeah,
famous.
yeah. The barbershop quartet on Main Street to the entertainment at the Top of the World nightclub at the
Right.
Contemporary Hotel, and so that all went through our office. In addition to that, I was really very, very fortunate that Jack Wagner, who was the voice of Disneyland, came out to Florida to help with getting some of the announcements pre-recorded and everything to use in the park, as well as some live stuff. But then Jack had to go back to Disneyland, and I mentored under him, and I ended up becoming the park announcer at
Huh.
Disney World for that year and a half that I was there until everything started to be produced in California. But I really thoroughly enjoyed all of that time at Disney World. It was amazing.
Well, you were there at a great time. We both were there at a great time. I mean,
Yeah,
I
yeah. In
I
fact,
picked up.
we actually both moved into the same apartment complex,
That's right.
uh, Camelot.
Camelot. Camelot. Camelot.
Yes. See, we both lived in Camelot. Camelot.
We had this big round table, and we come in there with our spears and our swords, and it was kind of
Yes.
fun.
And I lived upstairs from you.
That's
We
right.
were the same stairwell, but you were downstairs, I was upstairs. And
Right.
I've often told the story, and I'm going to tell it again because it's a great story. You were working in the evening, and you would get off late in the evening and come home, and
Right.
you had a dog at the time. And as soon as you would get home from work, you would let the dog out into the common area of the apartment complex. And I've often told the story that late at night, because I could hear you outside my window from my apartment upstairs, you would be out in the common area at 1 o'clock or so in the morning with your dog, and then Mike would come out there with his deep baritone voice, and he would say, "Come, Fluffy, Fluffy, come." And in the dead of night, you would hear this magnificent voice out in the common area calling for Fluffy. It was a big English sheepdog, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. Great dog. Great dog.
But I mean, for if you're a broadcaster, you have a tendency that you are always on.
You're always on.
So no matter whether you're ordering something at the grocery store or whatever, have that radio voice that go into.
It was good.
Oh
It was
gosh.
good. It was a great 30 years. A great 30 years. 30 plus years.
And all that,
Worked in
and then
great
so
markets.
and you were working with WDBO, and you said to me, "Hey, listen, I want to think looking for some part timers at the station, and you got me a part time job at WDBO, and I was there on Sunday morning, running the board, running the commercials and the religious programs." And I had like a 3-hour shift, but it was a few extra bucks in the pocket.
That's right. And it kept you in the game. So that was cool. It was really cool. Yeah, those were great years. Those 5 years I spent in Orlando, I really, really enjoyed. In fact, I was just back there a couple of weeks ago. Went to a restaurant that I haven't been to since 1977. And that was just as good today as it was when I remember going there back in those days.
Which one was that?
It was called, it was a steak restaurant. And it was
the Columbia House?
Pardon me?
Was it the Columbia House?
No. Actually, the Columbia, I was at that Friday night in St. Augustine. No, what the heck was it? Oh, shucks. I can't remember. It was on Colonial Drive, a big steakhouse, owned by the same family that's owned it since the 1960s.
Wow.
I got to remember the name. It'll come back. They always do. La Cantina. Linda's La Cantina. Just came in. And it wasn't necessarily an Italian or a Mexican restaurant. It was a steak restaurant, and it was phenomenal. In fact, I think I put a photo of the steak on my Facebook page.
Oh.
If anybody cares. Mike Miller, Jacksonville, Florida. You can find me on Facebook.
But so you left in the early or mid 70s. You left the Orlando market, and is that when you went north?
I went to Hartford, Connecticut.
Okay.
There was a headhunter who was vacationing in Cocoa Beach. His name was Mike Joseph. And I remember him calling me up, and he said, "You don't know who I am, and I really don't know who you are, but I've got something I want to ask you about." And there was an opening for a nighttime talk host at WTIC in Hartford. I wasn't anxious to leave Orlando at all, but I was at a point in my life where I really wanted to start grabbing for the brass ring, trying to get to higher markets, better markets all the time. I mean, this was going to be my career. So I ended up going there and spent 3 years in Hartford. Then I went to Detroit at WXYZ, ABC. Was there. Then I went to Boston. Then I went to Miami, and I haven't left Florida. And that's where we are.
Yeah,
Jacksonville was my life.
That's what life in broadcasting really was all about back in the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and all. Was if you were not willing to jump from market to market, you probably weren't suited for broadcasting, because that's when a lot of stations became groups, and very often they would want to take their employees and move them from market to market, and you had to be willing to do that.
Well, except there were always franchise broadcasters who you just knew never would leave, and normally they were the morning people. J.P. McCarthy in Detroit was one. Dick Purton in Detroit was another guy that I remember. Larry Lujak, of course, in Chicago. I mean, these were guys that were really franchise players, if you will, if I can draw a sports analogy, because there was just nothing that they would take to leave, and there was nothing that their stations wouldn't match or exceed in order to make sure they didn't leave. So you had those people back in those days. And remember, again, back in the 70s, where we're talking about here, there weren't even that many FM radio stations that were doing anything other than beautiful music. So it was still the years of the AM stations. When I went to Miami, there were 3 AM talk stations broadcasting simultaneously in that market, and that was probably the most competitive arena that I ever worked in, was Miami, because of that. Uh, Both of the other stations had franchise broadcasters that were there, and had been there for eons, if you will. And I came into town, and I mean, they gave me an initiation, especially the writers in the Miami Herald, of who is this carpetbagger coming down here from up north, and who is he? Da 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 da. Uh, uh, Luckily, I was able to do fine enough in Miami to stay there until they syndicated my show, um, and gave it to somebody else. But then I went to West Palm, and then I came up here to Jacksonville because my wife at the time didn't want to leave Florida. But I was ready to go back out in the field and look and see what was out there. But uh, we decided we wanted to stay in Florida. By that time, my parents were snowbirds down here, and my ex's parents, my in-laws, lived in St. Pete Beach, so we weren't going to leave. We just weren't going to leave. And that's why when I left broadcasting here in Jacksonville, I actually went into government work at that time for 20 years.
And for those that have been following my show for the last so many months, there's another great broadcaster that I've had on my show a couple of times, Kid Curry, who is from the Miami market and worked at Y100 and also Power 96, and
Yep.
was really a great force in the Miami market, and is now in Colorado. We've had a couple of conversations. There is something about broadcasting that when it is in your blood once, it always remains there. And whether you stay in it full time, or you dabble in it part time, or you become a guest on it, further into your own life and future, there's just something about it that stays with you. I know that a lot of connections that you made in Jacksonville in the government market was as a result of your interactions with some of those people in broadcasting.
Yeah, you're exactly right. When I left broadcasting, I got a phone call from the mayor's office, and this again is now in the year 2000. Um, and he and I had known each other quite a bit because I would have him on regularly. In fact, something that I borrowed from what I was doing in Hartford. In Hartford, I was doing a show called Ask the Governor, and the governor at the time, Ella Grasso, God rest her soul, was my guest, and we became just great friends. So when it came to Jacksonville, I started a program called Ask the Mayor, and the mayor was on once a month, and he would bring people from his administration and so on to answer questions from the audience. But as soon as I left broadcasting, he called and said, "What are you going to do now?" And I said, "Well, I'm really not sure." And he said, "Come and have lunch." So we got together, and he said, I need somebody who, he said, "I really need somebody who knows the city council." And Jacksonville has a consolidated government, and we have 19 city council members, which is pretty big for a city our size.
Yeah.
And since I had known the city council members all through my work on the air, he said, "You would be perfect because they know you already." So I took that job and stayed with him until he left office from term limits in 2003, and then went to work for a state transportation agency for the remainder of my years before I retired in 2019. There you have it.
Yep. And that's the world as we see it.
And that's the way it is, as Walter would say. That's the way it is. That's the way it was, anyhow. It's funny in thinking about the show, Stuart, and for the audience, Stuart and I have talked about this for a while, and he said, one of the things I want to do is just talk about how radio has changed over the years. And there was one thing that I thought about the other day in thinking about the show that I miss, and I think a lot of people of our genre miss as well. And that's the personal relationship between the people on the air and the audience. And today, of course, so much of it is syndicated. You don't even know where these people are. I mean, I listen to Sirius XM all the time, and these guys are everywhere. They're everywhere, and that's technology today. They can be anywhere. But I mean, I remember the time, Stuart, as well you, when a favorite disc jockey was one who would take your requests on the phone and do dedications on the air. And like this is going out to Susie, and Susie, Frank wants you to know they had a great time last week when you guys went out on a date, and blah, 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 blah. And I mean, that develops such a personal relationship between the audience and the disc jockey. And you just don't have that anymore. They can't do that because they're all multi-market stations. And unless you were, I mean, the last person you're going to hear doing that is Casey Kasem. Rest his soul. When he would say, this is a dedication going out to so-and-so, that's what made Casey as well liked as he was and respected by his audience. Forget the top 40 that he would do every Saturday, counting down the top 40. But it was who the dedications were going for, and guys that were in the armed forces overseas, and somebody wanted to send him a hello. I mean, you just don't get that anymore, and it's really a shame. The closest thing to that, though, probably is sports talk radio more than it is the kind of radio that you and I did.
Yeah, for the the armchair quarterbacks and everything to call in and discuss last week's game and what they think is going to happen this week. But you're right, and those were also thinking back into our days on the radio. Again, the studios were usually in the downtown areas of the cities where you were broadcasting from, and they usually had a big picture window in the front of the station. And so the DJ or the talk show host or whoever was there, people would walk by the street and they would stop and they'd be waving in the window. And I mean, this goes back even to WGN on Michigan Avenue in Chicago, where you used to see the on-air personalities while they were on air, and they'd have the speaker outside so you could hear it. I remember that when, my first real gig was at WTHI in Terre Haute, Indiana, of all places. And I did a show from 8 until midnight. And it was an FM show. And the group that I used to play was like Montavani and Percy Faith in the orchestra.
Did that at
the old Yeah, the old 33, and you'd have to cue it up and get it ready and start the turntable and put your finger on the turntable and wait and introduce it and then let the turntable go. And most of the time it worked, and sometimes you'd get that screechy squeaking on the thing. But I used to turn my monitor around because I didn't want the people that were walking down the street to see me. I had a good deep voice, but I was just this little nebbish of a kid that was sitting behind the microphone. And every once in a while, the phone would ring and somebody would call because they wanted to hear something by, in my day, almost every night somebody would call and say, "Would you please play Paul Muriel, Love Is Blue?" Oh, yeah. I probably played that every night that I was on it, but they wanted to dedicate it to somebody, and it was a love song. But here's this little guy behind the microphone who's introducing it, and they would call up on the phone. What time do you get off the air? Can I meet you in the parking lot? And you tried to avoid that at all costs because they thought I was Julio Iglesias in their mind, but I was just this little 5-foot chunky kid that was broadcasting for his first. But that was the fun part of radio, was people didn't see you necessarily unless you were in that picture window on the street. Right. But that was the fun part of radio. Today, radio is a visual medium too, just like we're doing right now. We're basically doing like a radio talk show, but the visual aspect is there, and that's thanks to YouTube and Facebook and everything else.
Who really started that was Rush Limbaugh. Rush and the Golden Microphone. Rush had a tremendous studio that he had built in his home in Palm Beach, and I mean, he was with remember, the EIB network, Excellence in Broadcasting Network, as he named it.
Right.
But he would always say, this golden microphone goes everywhere. And he did his show most of the time from Palm Beach. And that's where he ended up staying full time. But he always had a camera on and did his show that way. But he was one of the real pioneers of video radio talk.
Yeah, well, Howard Stern too.
That's right. That's true. Stern did that too. That's true.
Was a leader in that too, and people started, and at that time, that's when you got to see the voice that was behind that microphone.
Right.
Larry Lujak was the same way.
I didn't recall Larry having a camera in his.
No, not Larry Lujak. Who am I thinking? Don Imus. Don Imus,
yeah.
Who also was a visual broadcaster right up until the end of his career.
Right.
But those were the days, I wrote to you just recently because I found a new Facebook page. There was a
really?
there's a new Facebook page out there called "I Was a DJ When DJs Actually Spun Discs."
Yep.
And if you have a chance, go to it. Just type in "I was a DJ when," and it's a Facebook page, and they encourage people from our era who were actually DJs that spun records and all to share some of those memories and information and all. And it's a lot of fun, and it's kind of a trip down memory lane because they bring up a lot of the old names, that we remember as kids. And now, when you were at Indiana University with me, weren't you on the student radio network? Student radio network also.
We broadcast out of the Quad, if you remember. The
Foster Quadrangle.
And it was WIN is the call letters and that we used on that, and that was carrier current. That was not over the air. That was carrier current, which meant it went over the phone lines, and you could only get it in those 4 dorms. That was the only place you get it. But that's what got me into radio. I mean, and it was from a former classmate from Hammond High who was working it and called me up and said, "Hey, listen, we've got this opening," and I was already quote doing entertainment because I was in a band called the Citations with Jimmy Harris on the IU campus. So I ended up taking on shifts on this, even though I was like you, a Sammy. But our frat house was not that far away from the Quad, so I would walk over and, as my parents would say,
down a hill.
Yeah, you spent too much time on the air and not enough in the classroom, and that's why you left IU. Actually, the answer was, and I told him this, I said, no, it's because if I could have taken broadcasting at IU or mass communications, which I ended up graduating in or majoring in, I would have had to take 2 years of math, and I didn't want to take any math because I stunk at it. And I knew it. So that's why I transferred to Columbia, and that's because I didn't have any prerequisites before I could jump right into doing mass communications.
And one of my fondest memories was that I was stuck on campus during the winter storm of 1967.
So was I.
We could not get out of Bloomington in order to get home, and also we spent almost all of our time at the radio station because the radio station was up and going on. We were giving weather updates as well as spinning records.
Well, I was at IU too, but I was at the Gary campus. I had already left Bloomington and was going to school for another semester at the Gary campus, but WLTH, my radio station where I was working at the time part-time, was down the street from the campus. So during the storm, I just walked over there and went on the air because they needed bodies in there in order to try to keep everybody informed of what was going on. It was exciting. But I was there for 3 years.
There's a lot of people that are watching and listening to this show right now that have absolutely no clue as to what we're talking about. But they used to try to keep us in the station as long as possible, just for the news updates. And the news used to come over the ticker tape on from UPI or the Associated Press. and you'd run into the newsroom, and you'd rip the information off of the machine and run back in. We have an update on the storm in wherever it was, and please stay off of the road, and this road is closed. And I mean, that's the way we disseminated news in those days to people, to try and keep them off the road.
I can't recall the year. It might have been 86, but when Florida was hit with Hurricane Andrew, I think it was 86.
That was in 92.
92, thank you. I was broadcasting at that time at WJNO in West Palm Beach. And Channel 5 was across the street from us. We were right on Flagler Drive, right off the Intercoastal. And the TV station that we had a relationship was right across the street from us. So during the storm, and I was stuck there for the storm on the air, but when I went off the air to bring somebody else in, then I had to go over to TV and get in front of the camera and do the same thing that I was doing on radio. And we did that for 3 days before we could finally get home. It was a remarkable time.
Yeah. But I mean, those were the days when there were actual people, what we knew as electronics was minimal. Everything that happened because there was a human being making it happen. From throwing the switches to changing the changing the tubes if necessary to keep things going. And usually you had a tower that was broadcasting. That was a remote location, and there was an engineer that was either stuck there or was there to try and make sure that the broadcast signal kept going out. But everything is so digitized today. All right, so
it is.
I want to throw back a little bit, because I keep looking at the drum set behind you, and going back, as I say, into the 60s, and our band, the Kingsmen. Christine, I think, has a photo that we have shared for years and years of what the times were like back in the 60s when we had our band together. Those are some photos of the Kingsmen. Unfortunately, Mike, you can't see Mike in those photos, because Mike was playing drums, and he was usually in the background. But those were the doo-wop days, where you had a lead singer and you had the background singers. The picture in the upper right-hand corner, that nerd sitting there in the front, in the lower right-hand corner, that's me. I was playing keyboards in this band, and we were pretty
bass and singing bass too. You were the bass singer.
Yep, so I was a bass singer and play the keyboards, and then you'd have a lead singer and then three-part harmony behind them, of which we all did. Yep. But those were the days. That photo goes back, 60 some years?
Yeah, well, I'm looking at it now, and since none of you had you graduated in 63, right?
I graduated in 63 with Huey and with Bennett.
And Howard.
And Howard was a year before us. He was the first one. He graduated in 62, and he went on to Indiana, and then we all continued. And then Jimmy was a year behind us, and you were 2 years behind, right?
Right. So that had to, if he graduated in 62, so that means that this photo was either taken in 61 or 62.
Yep.
Right before he graduated. Now, people have got to realize something. You're taking a look at these photos. You're looking at kids who are 13, 14, and 15 years old. That was it. And we played a lot. I mean, we played not every weekend, but we played an awful lot.
Well, and then when we weren't playing, we were rehearsing. We would get together
in my basement.
Yeah. And we decided to do it in your basement, because you didn't want to have to pack up your drums and carry them around from place to place.
Exactly right. I mean, you guys had everything you needed, and I was the one that had to carry the drums. But here's something I don't know if you remember, Stuart, but our first paid gig was at Wilbur Wright Junior High School. It was a
I
sock
remember.
hop. Do you remember what we did after we got done with the show?
Yeah, there were what, 8 of us in the group, and I think we played for 2.5 hours or so, 2 or 3 sets, and they paid us $20.
40.
And was it 40?
Yeah,
Oh,
we
that was
just didn't tell you about the other 20.
we were in the big time by then. Yeah, we got $40 for all of us, and then
Yeah.
we went out and we
$5
blew it on
a
pizza.
That's right.
Did-
We went to Candiano's Pizza, Candy's Pizza. And the reason we went there is because it was the only place where our record
which
was in their jukebox.
yes,
And actually people played it
yes.
and laughed.
And for those that are listening and watching, if you'd like a copy of our record and everything, I think we're down to the last 8 or 9,000.
This is the only one I've got, and it's cracked. So I'd like to get another one myself. But I did see them online, but I think they cost like, I don't know, $80 or something like that. Some idiot's trying to sell it. I don't know.
But and then Mike alluded to the B side of the Humpty Dumpty was supposed to be our A side record. The side was Good Night, Sweetheart. I will never be able to live it down, but we were in this recording session and we did Humpty Dumpty, and I think we were given like an hour to record, and we took up about 40 minutes or so to do Humpty Dumpty. So by the time we recorded the B side, Good Night, Sweetheart, we were under the gun to get it done.
Yeah, one take.
And we did one take. And during the little instrumental interlude in the middle of the song, I hit a wrong note. And I never have to this day lived that down. That because that wrong note was recorded, pressed, and sold as is.
Well, and I'll tell you, if anybody listened to it, it stuck out like a sore thumb. I mean, because it was this chord that he hits and there's no other music behind it, just him hitting this chord, and it's the wrong chord for the song. But that's all right. We just kept going.
And as soon as I hit it, I knew it was wrong, and I thought, okay, well, when we do a second take, I won't do it. We had no time to do a second take.
No
They
time.
said, that's it. You guys are finished. Done. So,
that's all we could afford to pay for. We had to pay for our own studio time. That's why. You know.
Oh boy. Oh. So I guess we should dash any ideas of putting the band back together and going on the road.
You know, by the way, one of my fondest and most embarrassing moments on radio was also hitting a wrong chord. And it was interviewing Jimmy Carter. That was
in Gary, wasn't it?
No, this was Orlando.
Okay.
The first time I interviewed him was in Orlando. I also interviewed him in Hartford and interviewed him in Detroit, but the first time was in Orlando, and it was right before the New Hampshire primary. And I won't forget it because, I mean, he comes in and he was going to kick off my show at 8:00, and he got there around 7:30 and said, is there somewhere we can go and talk? I'd like to get to know you a little bit. So we went to a private room with just him and his handlers and me, and we got to talk for about 15 minutes, and then we went on the air. And I wouldn't let the media in the studio where we were, but we had this big window between the studio and the lobby in Orlando. I don't know if you remember that, Stuart, but there is the national media, because we had the Democratic candidate for president of the United States in studio with this jerk from Orlando, Florida. And I mean, they're all lined up. They've got their network cameras on, and I'm nervous as hell. And, you know, the theme comes up, and now here's Mike Miller, and thank you all very much. Delighted and honored today to have as my special guest in studio for the next hour, the great governor of Georgia, Governor Jimmy Walker. And I hear this little voice in the background say, that's Carter.
Yeah. Hello.
Excuse me? He said, "That's Carter, Jimmy Carter."
Yeah.
And
Jimmy,
I said, "Well, what did I say?" He said, "You said Jimmy Walker."
Jimmy Walker, who was the actor on yeah,
Dynamite. That's what it was.
Dynamite.
Dynamite. So anyhow, that was my wrong chord and the most embarrassing act that ever happened to me on radio in over 30 years. And you know what? When I saw him again in Detroit, he remembered it. He remembered, and I was shocked that he had remembered it, but he did.
Yeah.
Because I met him and it was like, Mr. President, it's great to see you again. And Mrs. Carter, it's great to see you too. And he said, "Just remember my name this time, Mike, would you?" And I said, "Yes, sir. I'll be happy to."
Only make that mistake once.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gosh.
That was
Well,
great, man.
Mike, as always, it's great to reminisce. And every time we're together, whether it's on the phone or in person or whatever, it's great to just look back and see the good old days. Because if we didn't have the good old days, we wouldn't be who we are today.
One final question for you, Stuart, because I
Yeah.
forgot.
Uh-oh.
Did you play Chip or Dale at Disney in character?
Chip.
You were Chip. Folks,
I
just try to picture Stuart Sax in the Chipmunk. You were in that thing for hours, weren't you?
Oh yeah, that was something that middle and upper management, every person that worked at Disney was required to spend one day in a character costume so that they would know what it was all about and what it was like. And I got to tell you, it ain't easy.
And if they'd known Stuart even more than they did, they would have said, "You're enough of a character yourself. You don't have to dress up. Just go
That's
out
right.
and greet people."
And I've been pretty much a chipmunk the rest of my life. So,
Stuart, great to see you. Great to see you. Say hello to the
good
other
seeing you
opposite
too.
sex for me.
I will do so. And thanks to all of you for spending some time on Someone You Should Know with my good friend Mike Miller. And I hope you'll be here again next week. Don't know if I'm going to be here yet, but I will be. So go out and make it a good day and be good to yourself. And again, Mike Miller, thank you very, very much, my dear friend.
My pleasure. Thanks very much for having me on.